Welcome to our deep dive into the world of subliminal persuasion. Today we're exploring an audio clip you sent us from Derren Brown, Mind Control. It's a real eye-opener when it comes to the subtle ways. Our minds can be influenced without us even realizing it.
Yeah, it's fascinating how Derren Brown, he takes what advertisers do every day, attempting to sway our choices, and turns it into a controlled experiment where it really highlights the mechanics of something we're all exposed to.
Yeah, he does. In this case, he sets up two advertising executives from a well-known agency with a unique challenge. He asks them to create an ad campaign in just 20 minutes for a chain of taxidermy stores. Now, that's a product that not everyone finds appealing, right?
Right, and that's deliberate. By choosing something a bit morbid and outside the norm, Brown forces the executives to think outside the box, making them potentially more susceptible to the subliminal cues he's going to introduce.
Okay, so he's got these two advertising pros, a super tight deadline, and a product that's, well, let's just say not cuddly. What's the next step in Brown's subliminal setup?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Before the executives even start brainstorming, Brown plants a series of subliminal messages during their taxi ride to the location, where they'll be creating the campaign.
Sneaky. So he's disguising these messages as part of a normal conversation.
Exactly. He casually drops keywords and phrases, repeating them in ways that wouldn't necessarily raise suspicion. He weaves them seamlessly into the conversation.
So while the executives think they're just having a casual chat on the way to this bizarre meeting, their brains are actually being primed with specific ideas.
Precisely. It's a classic example of priming, which is a psychological technique where exposure to one stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus. In this case, the priming stimulus is the subliminal messages during the taxi ride, and the response is the ad campaign they create.
Clever. So tell me what happens when these executives finally sit down to brainstorm. Do they immediately start talking about stuffing animals and formaldehyde?
Not exactly. They're given a stuffed raccoon for inspiration, which is pretty hilarious when you think about it, and they begin brainstorming. And as they grapple with the unusual task, they start to generate ideas.
Okay, but are these just random ideas, or do we start to see Brown's subliminal influence creeping in?
This is where it gets fascinating. Despite their initial aversion to taxidermy, certain themes start emerging in their brainstorming session. They talk about tears, the fear of taxidermy itself, the loss of mothers, and a desire to add some wildness to their lives.
Hold on, those themes sound awfully familiar.
They do, don't they? Because remember those subliminal messages Brown planted during the taxi ride? Well, guess what? Words like mommy, peers, as real as it gets. Even the phrase out of Africa were all cleverly woven into that seemingly casual conversation.
You're kidding. So he actually used those exact words.
He did. And what's even more striking is that, as the executives present their ad campaign ideas, they unknowingly echo these very phrases and themes.
Wow. I have to admit, this is making me a little uneasy.
Yeah.
I mean, if our brains can be so easily manipulated without our conscious awareness, what does that say about our free will?
That's a great question, and one that philosophers have debated for centuries. But what's important to remember is that while subliminal persuasion can influence our thoughts and behavior, it's not some sort of mind control magic.
So it's more about subtle nudges than complete control.
Exactly. We still have the ability to think critically and make our own choices, but this experiment does highlight how powerful even subtle cues can be, especially when they tap into our subconscious.
Okay, so let's talk about those subliminal messages in more detail. I'm really curious to hear how Brown managed to slip them into the conversation without the executives catching on.
Well, one technique he uses is repetition. He repeats certain words and phrases multiple times, but not in a way that seems unnatural or forced. For example, he kept bringing up the idea a journey and referred to the stores multiple times as taxi journey stores.
It sounds so innocent when you put it like that, but I can see how that repetition, even if it's subtle, could start to seep into your subconscious.
Exactly. And it's not just repetition. He also uses a technique called anchoring. This is where you associate a particular emotion or idea with the specific word or image.
Okay, so give me an example of how Brown uses anchoring in this experiment.
Well, remember, the stuffed raccoon the executives were given, that serves as a visual anchor. It's a constant reminder of the task at hand, and it helps to further embed the subliminal messages into their subconscious.
So every time they look at that raccoon, they're also subconsciously reminded of the words and phrases that Brown has linked to it.
Exactly. It's a very clever way of reinforcing those subliminal messages.
Okay, so we've talked about priming, repetition, and anchoring. What other techniques does Brown use in this experiment?
Well, he also taps into the power of emotion. Notice how many of the subliminal messages are emotionally charged words like mommy, tears, and wildness.
You're right. Those are all words that evoke strong feelings.
Exactly. And by associating those emotions with the idea of taxidermy, Brown is able to influence the executive's creative process on a deeper level.
I'm starting to see how all of these techniques work together to create a powerful subliminal effect.
It's like a recipe. You combine the right ingredients in the right proportions, and you get a delicious, or in this case, influential result.
Okay, so Brown has cleverly planted his subliminal messages, and the executives have unknowingly incorporated them into their ad campaign ideas. What happens next? Does he reveal his master plan?
He does. He plays back excerpts from the taxi ride recording, highlighting the specific words and phrases he planted, and the look on the executives' faces. Well, you can imagine their surprise.
I bet they were floored. They probably thought they were coming up with these brilliant original ideas.
It's a real aha moment.
Hmm.
They suddenly realized that their creative process wasn't as independent as they thought it was.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the setup of Brown's experiment, the techniques he used to plant subliminal messages, and the executive's shocked reactions when he revealed his master plan. But before we move on, I want to pause and really let this sink in. What does this experiment tell us about the power of the subconscious mind?
It highlights that our subconscious is constantly processing information, even when we're not consciously aware of it. And this information can influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways that we may not even recognize.
It's a little unsettling, isn't it, to think that our decisions could be swayed by forces that are completely outside of our conscious control.
It can be. But this knowledge can also be empowering. Once we understand how subliminal persuasion works, we can start to be more mindful of the messages we're exposed to and make more conscious choices about what we allow to influence us.
So it's not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everything. It's about developing a healthy awareness of the subtle ways in which our minds can be influenced.
Exactly. It's about taking back control of our mental landscape and making sure that our decisions are truly our own.
This really makes you think about all the subtle messages that we encounter every day, not just in advertising, but in all aspects of life.
Absolutely. Think about the music playing in a store, the colors used in a restaurant, or even the way products are arranged on a shelf. These are all carefully crafted to influence our mood and behavior.
So we're swimming in a sea of subliminal messages, and most of the time, we're not even aware of it.
That's right. It's like the air we breathe. It's all around us, but we rarely stop to think about it.
Okay, so we've established that subliminal persuasion is real, and it's everywhere. But how effective is it really? I mean, does it actually work to change people's minds or behaviors?
That's a complex question, and the answer is, it depends. The effectiveness of subliminal messaging is influenced by a lot of factors, including the individual, the context, and the specific techniques used.
So there's no guarantee that it will work every time.
Exactly. Some people are more susceptible to subliminal influence than others, and the context matters too. If you're already inclined to buy a certain product, for example, a subliminal message might just reinforce that desire. But if you're completely opposed to something, it's unlikely that a subliminal message will change your mind entirely.
So it's more about nudging people in a certain direction, rather than brainwashing them.
That's a good way to put it. And it's important to remember that subliminal messages are just one factor among many that influence our decisions, our conscious thoughts, our values, our experiences. All of these play a role as well.
Okay, so let's say I'm a savvy consumer, and I'm aware of the potential for subliminal persuasion. Are there any practical steps I can take to protect myself from it?
Absolutely. Awareness is the first line of defense. Once you understand the techniques used in subliminal persuasion, you can start to spot them in the world around you.
So it's like a game almost. You learn the rules, and then you can start to see how they're being used.
Exactly. Pay attention to the language used in advertising, the images you're exposed to, the music you hear. Look for patterns, repetitions, and emotional appeals. And don't just focus on the obvious. Pay attention to the subtle cues as well.
So it's about being a more mindful consumer of information.
That's right. And it's not about being paranoid or suspicious of everything. It's about cultivating a healthy skepticism and a willingness to question the messages you're being fed.
And what about those internal messages, the ones we tell ourselves? How can we be more aware of our own biases and assumptions?
That's a great point. We all have our own internal filters that shape how we perceive the world. Our past experiences, our beliefs, our values. All of these things color our interpretations and influence our decisions.
So how do we become more aware of those filters?
It takes practice and self-reflection. Pay attention to your reactions to different situations. Ask yourself why you feel a certain way or why you hold a particular belief, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions.
So it's about developing a sense of self-awareness and intellectual humility.
Exactly. And remember, we're all works in progress. None of us are immune to bias or subliminal influence. But the more we understand about how our minds work, the better equipped we are to navigate the complexities of the world.
This is all really fascinating, but I have to admit it's also a bit overwhelming. It feels like we're constantly being bombarded with messages, both internal and external,
Yeah,
and it's hard to know what to trust.
I understand. It can feel like a lot to take in, but remember, the goal isn't to shut out the world entirely. It's about becoming a more discerning consumer of information. It's about learning to separate the signal from the noise.
So how do we do that? How do we filter out the noise and focus on the signals that matter?
Well, there are a few things you can do. First, be selective about the sources of information you trust. Seek out sources that are known for their accuracy, fairness, and objectivity. Second, be aware of your own biases and how they might be shaping your perceptions. And third, be willing to question everything. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig deeper, ask questions, and seek out multiple perspectives.
So it's about being an active participant in the information landscape,
Hmm.
rather than a passive recipient.
Exactly. And remember, critical thinking is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Okay, so let's bring it back to Derren Brown's experiment for a moment. You mentioned that the executives were pretty shocked when he revealed how he'd influenced their thinking. What was their reaction after the initial surprise wore off?
Well, initially there was a bit of embarrassment, of course. No one likes to feel like they've been manipulated. But once they got over the initial shock, they were actually quite intrigued. They wanted to understand how Brown had done it. They peppered him with questions about his techniques and the psychology behind subliminal persuasion.
So in a way, Brown's experiment sparked their curiosity and made them more aware of the power of the subconscious mind.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of his work. He uses illusion and mentalism, not just to entertain, but also to educate and enlighten. He wants to show us how our minds work, both the conscious and the subconscious aspects, and to challenge us to think differently about the world around us.
It's like he's using manipulation to expose manipulation.
Precisely. And in doing so, he empowers us to be more critical consumers of information and to question the assumptions we often make about our own free will.
So while subliminal persuasion can be used for unethical purposes, it can also be a tool for self-discovery and growth.
Absolutely. The key is to be aware of its power and to use it consciously and ethically.
Okay, so we've talked about the mechanics of a subliminal persuasion, the psychology behind it, and even some practical tips for protecting ourselves from its influence. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the ethics of using these techniques.
It's a complex issue, and one that deserves careful consideration. As we've discussed, subliminal persuasion can be a powerful tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
Right, it's all about intent. A chef can use a knife to create a beautiful meal, or they can use it to harm someone. The tool itself is neutral.
That's a great analogy. And the same is true for subliminal persuasion. In the hands of a responsible practitioner, it can be used to promote positive change, like encouraging healthy habits or reducing prejudice. But in the wrong hands, it can be used to manipulate and exploit people.
So where do we draw the line? How do we ensure that subliminal persuasion is used ethically and responsibly?
That's a question that society is still grappling with. There are no easy answers. But I think it starts with awareness. The more we understand about how subliminal persuasion works, the better equipped we are to recognize its use and to hold those who use it accountable for their actions.
So it's a shared responsibility. It's up to all of us to be informed consumers, critical thinkers, and ethical citizens.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of education and open dialogue. We need to have honest conversations about the potential benefits and risks of subliminal persuasion. And we need to develop clear guidelines for its ethical use.
It's like any new technology. We need to understand its potential and its limitations, and we need to use it wisely and responsibly.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's a good place to leave our listeners with a final thought. Subliminal persuasion is a powerful tool, and it's up to all of us to ensure that it's used for good.
Be aware, be critical, be ethical,
Hmm.
and never stop learning.
Well said. And remember, the journey of self-discovery and awareness is an ongoing one. The more we understand about ourselves and the world around us, the better equipped we are to make informed choices and to live authentic lives.
So much of what we've talked about today hinges on awareness. becoming more conscious of these subtle influences around us. Is there anything else listeners can do to build up that awareness, kind of like a mental gym workout?
One thing that strikes me is the power of simply paying attention to your gut feelings. We often dismiss those instinctive reactions as irrational, but they can actually be quite insightful.
You mean like that feeling you get when something just seems off, even if you can't quite put your finger on why?
Exactly. Those gut feelings can sometimes be. You know your subconscious mind picking up on something that your conscious mind hasn't registered yet. It's like a built-in warning system.
So we should learn to trust our intuition more.
I think so. Of course, intuition isn't always accurate, but it's worth paying attention to those gut feelings and exploring them further. Ask yourself, why do I feel this way? What's making me uncomfortable? Sometimes those feelings can be a clue that you're being influenced in a way that you don't consciously approve of.
That's a great point. It's like we have this internal radar that's constantly scanning for potential threats, but we often ignore its signals.
Exactly. And the more we learn to tune into those signals, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves from manipulation. Another mental workout strategy is to actively question the messages you're exposed to. Don't just passively absorb information. Think critically about it. Ask yourself, who created this message? What's their agenda? What techniques are they using to try to persuade me?
It's like becoming a detective, looking for clues and hidden meanings.
Exactly. And the more you practice this kind of critical thinking, the better you'll become at spotting subliminal persuasion techniques and resisting their influence.
So it's a combination of tuning in to our internal radar and sharpening our critical thinking skills.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process. The world of subliminal persuasion is constantly evolving, so we need to stay vigilant and keep our mental defenses up.
Okay, so we've talked about how to protect ourselves from subliminal persuasion. But what about the flip side? What if we want to use these techniques for good? Can subliminal messaging be used to promote positive change?
That's an interesting question, and one that researchers are exploring. There is some evidence to suggest that subliminal messages can be used to promote positive behaviors, such as encouraging healthy eating habits or reducing prejudice.
So it's not just about manipulation and mind control. It could potentially be a tool for personal growth and social good.
Exactly. But I think it's important to approach this with caution, even when used with good intentions. Subliminal persuasion raises ethical concerns. It's essential to ensure that individuals are fully informed and consent to being exposed to these messages. Transparency and respect for autonomy are paramount.
Sounds like there's still a lot we don't know about subliminal persuasion and its potential applications.
That's right. It's a relatively new field of study, and there's much more research to be done, but I think the more we learn about how our minds work, both consciously and subconsciously, the better equipped we'll be to use these techniques responsibly and ethically.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of subliminal persuasion. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the mechanics of subliminal messaging to the psychology behind it to the ethical considerations surrounding its use.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
It has. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that subliminal persuasion is a real phenomenon, and it's something we need to be aware of. But it's not some magical mind control technique. We still have the power to make our own choices.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about how subliminal persuasion works, the better equipped we are to navigate the world and make decisions that are truly in alignment with our values.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to be mindful, be critical, and be empowered. The world is full of messages, both overt and covert. Pay attention, ask questions, and trust your instincts.
And never underestimate the power of your own awareness. It's your greatest defense against manipulation and your greatest asset in shaping a life that's true to yourself.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those minds sharp.